As part of the new segment to the show called the Compass Literature Corner, we will be talking to local authors and writers who have had an impact on this region or whom this region has had an impact on. Today we have a woman who traded in the big city life for a life on the farm in Pelican Rapids, Minnesota. Her books all seem to have a common theme. Besides that of rural life, hers is a theme of wool and sheep. And this sheep has a yarn to tell to young and old. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to say that today's guest is both a children's author and a novelist. Welcome, Joan Jarvis Ellison.
Thank you.
So, Joan, why don't you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to go from fiction to kids' books to back again? Tell us a little bit about what inspired How to Paint a Sheep.
So the first inspiration was that my kids started having children, and so I had grandsons, and I had played with writing kids' stories since I was a little kid and really didn't do very well at it. But I wanted to write books for my grandsons. So when this grandson's parents got married, his dad suggested that they could have a parade in our field for their wedding. And what he really wanted to have was a parade with lambs that had been painted different colors. And I said, there is no way you're going to let lambs loose in the field. We'll never catch them again. But it was a cool idea. So instead of doing that the day of the wedding, we put the lambs in the barn and we filled spray bottles with Kool-Aid and took turns spraying sheep.
Fun.
So it actually works. And now we do it almost every year. We have a party and we paint sheep.
That's a good tradition to
Yeah,
start.
it's a good tradition, yeah.
And our audience members can start it if they pick up the book, How to Paint a Sheep, because it lists step-by-step instructions of how to paint them, which are easy to follow for kids and adults. Now,
All you need is a sheep.
well, yeah, that's the important part, and maybe some paint or dye. Kool-Aid, exactly. So why don't you tell us a little bit about why children's books? Why make the switch?
Children's books are short. You only have to have a creative idea that goes for maybe 30 pages at most. If you write an adult novel, it's got to be hundreds of pages, and you have to be able to carry that idea all the way through, and it's a lot more work. A children's book I can work on in my head while I'm doing other things. I can find a friend who's willing to illustrate it or take photographs myself. The adult fiction is a much more complicated problem. The children's books I can write 2 a year. I write one for each of my grandsons' birthdays, and so 2 a year I get done. The adult books take me 10 years. Yeah. It's a way different process. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, your most recent book, Tangled Web, a novel, is kind of a little bit of a mystery novel wrapped up with a midlife crisis. So tell us a little bit about what inspired you to go back to novels after you did your children's.
I wanted to try a mystery story, and I thought, they always say, write what you know about, and I've been raising sheep for 30 years now, so I know sheep. You know, I told my dad once I've learned everything there is about raising sheep, and he just laughed at me. He wasn't a farmer, but he knew that I wasn't speaking the truth. I was being naive, yes, actually naive. And so I have a lot of sheep stories in my head, and these are my sheep stories, but the characters aren't me. The characters aren't people that I know. And I got into the book, and I all of a sudden realized that I had no idea how I was going to deal emotionally with somebody going to jail or being on trial, so that it took me a lot longer to write the book than I expected to, and it changed the shape of the story. Once I made that realization, it really changed the story. It's a story about a young woman, a middle-aged woman with a midlife crisis who's really passionate about sheep and about fiber work. She's a knitter and a dyer and a spinner. And
so then why sheep? Why wool? Why fiber for all your books?
Because that's what I do. You know, we have a farm. We have a small farm. We raise hay for our sheep. We shear them in the winter. We put coats on them before we shear them so their wool is clean. And I've learned through the years how to dye the wool, how to clean the wool, how to spin it into yarn, and how to sell it. And so all those things are part of the stories.
So with all that knowledge rolling around in your head, How do you decide which ones are best suited for children's books and which ones are best suited for novels?
Good question. For example, in Tangled Web, there's a story about the dogs getting into the field, or the sheep getting out of their pasture and being attacked by dogs. And I wouldn't put that in a kid's book, certainly not in a kid's picture book, but I don't think I'd even put it in, like a middle school book, because it's just too sad of a story. But it's a real story, and it's really part of farming. It's one of the things that sheep farmers worry about a lot. So it fit in with the Tangled Web Story. It was an important part of the Tangled Web Story to show how different people respond to that kind of a crisis in their farm.
Now, do you think with all these sheep themes and everything else that maybe you are limiting your audience base, or do you think anybody can relate to this type of wool and fiber and just a passion?
I'm not sure of the answer to that. I think that if you can catch their attention, that the Tangled Web Story is a story about a woman who's trying to change the way she feels about her life, and runs into people that she hasn't experienced before, personalities that she hasn't experienced before. It's about a woman learning. The book clubs that I've talked to about it seem to feel that way, that it's a story about a woman's growth, and anybody can relate to that story. And if they learn a little bit about sheep at the same time, that's okay. Yeah.
Well, and as it's a story about growth, you sit there and you use themes such as wool and tapestry and her growth in her own passion to show her growth as a person. So what kind of other materials or themes did you use to show the transition from the beginning of the book to the end?
Okay, so she learned more about her own creative abilities. She learned that she could do art. Fiber and art don't get crossed very often, but she learned that she could make new things, that she could expand herself. She learned to stand up for herself, which was something that she didn't do before that. And she learned to do it through meeting other fiber people and her interactions with other fiber people. And then I really love the books that Dick Francis wrote. They were mystery books. He was a jockey in England, and he wrote a whole long series of books about different jockeys or different people involved in horse racing. And every single book of his, you learned something about some little part of raising horses or racing horses or financing horses, and you learned about it in depth, and I just thought that was beautiful. So I tried to do that in Tangled Web. You learn more about how to dye wool. You learn more about how to create a pattern, how to make a picture with yarn.
Well, and you went in depth to describe the dyeing process, to describe, how you temper wool, how you get it ready, and you basically, throughout the book, described certain aspects of raising sheep and what it means and everything else.
And I also think that people really enjoy stories about animals. It's something that they're interested in. So,
thank you so much, Joan. Now, where can our audience find your books?
Not very many places. They can find them at the Otter Tail County Historical Society Museum, and in Pelican Rapids, the shops in Pelican sell them. And then I have a blog. It's at www.sheepnotes.blogspot.com, and I sell them on my blog in my store.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, Joan.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
Wonderful. That's it for us in the Literature Corner. Please tune in next week for more people, places, and issues facing our viewing area. I'm Pioneer's Laura K. Prosser, and may your compass always point you in the direction of a good book.
Major support for Compass is provided by the ongoing support of the Leo P. Flynn Estate of Millbank, South Dakota. Additional support is provided by the Southwest Minnesota Private Industry Council, promoting Southwest Minnesota as a place rich with opportunity. Come for the jobs, stay for the lifestyle. More information at swmnpic.org.